Hello, everybody. Okay, good. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your Thursday evening with us, and welcome to the People's Forum. Is anyone here for the first time by chance? Okay. Well, welcome to the new faces and welcome back to the old faces. If you haven't been here before or need a refresher, the People's Forum is a political education center. It's a community center. It's an art space. We have courses constantly. We have volunteer meetings all the time. We're having an art bill downstairs, movies every week, concerts every month. And that's just to say there's so many ways to plug into the revolutionary working class struggle and building revolutionary culture. A revolutionary culture that has been taken from us, taken from our hands in the US, because we know that we have to study history, we have to study working class movements in order to strengthen ourselves in the fight for liberation today. And so that's why we're very honored to bring this conversation to the People's Forum today. Today we're going to be talking about the carceral republics and political prisoners in the US, in India, and in Israel, or the occupation of Palestine. Because in every anti-imperialist movement, there is always the struggle for the liberation of political prisoners. As working class people demand dignity in the face of exploitation and oppression, the ruling class remains dead set on maintaining the capitalist system that benefits only them. For the ruling class, the system isn't broken, it's working just as designed. And a crucial piece of maintaining that dominance rests on the targeting of political leaders and organizers. And that's because the struggle of political prisoners exposes in this very visceral way how two-faced our ruling class is, how hypocritical the systems that capitalism produces are. In India, in Palestine, and the US, governments or occupational forces that claim to speak for freedom, that claim to be these bastions of democracy, instead show us what justice means to them. It means dehumanization. It means violent abuses, brutal torture behind prison walls, and violent abuses outside of prison walls to target those activists in the first place. We can see what happened to Palestinian political prisoner Walid Daqqa, who was unjustly kept in prison, who wrote so beautifully to us from prison walls to continue the struggle, who even smuggled sperm across walls to continue his family with his wife, but unfortunately did not get to see liberation before he died from terminal illness in prison. Shame. In India, we can also see the case of the BK-16 as Modi and the BJP stoke the flames of Hindu nationalism. And also, we remember, actually, you mentioned it in your book, the assassination of communist leader Govind Pansare in 2015, which we actually commemorate every year here at the People's Forum. Shame. And in the US, of course, many people may have heard of or be familiar with the long history of political prisoners here. We're talking Leonard Peltier, we're talking Angela Davis, Martin Luther King, and of course, Assata Shakur, who passed away a few weeks ago, but luckily died free in revolutionary Cuba. Today we'll actually be hearing from Shaka Shakur. He'll be able to call in, who is a new African political prisoner and is going to be talking about the conditions he faces and international solidarity across our struggle. So we'll be very honored to have him. But that's just all to say, as they ramp up attacks on us, on our leaders, on organizers, on the people we see in the streets with us, they also underscore the very threat that an organized people united in resistance and fighting for liberation pose. The most vibrant movements hold up their political prisoners for that very reason. They are the people who have sacrificed the most basic freedoms to demand better conditions for working people everywhere, to demand liberation. And so today, we are joined by 4 thinkers and organizers who all have taken the task of holding up, of amplifying the voices of political prisoners. We're first joined by Lamise. If you haven't seen her in the streets already, she is an organizer with the Palestinian Youth Movement. PYM focuses on campaigns like Mask Off Maersk to demand a global arms embargo. They also take up international fundraising initiatives for Gaza, mass mobilizations with, actually the People's Forum participates in as Shut It Down for Palestine Coalition, and political education projects like the translation of the Trinity of Fundamentals. We're also joined by Suchitra Vijayan, who is an essayist, lawyer, and photographer working across oral history, state violence, and visual storytelling. She's the author of How Long Can the Moon Be Caged? Voices of Indian Political Prisoners, and founder of the Polis Project. We're also joined by Eugene Puryear, who is a journalist, writer, activist, politician, and host on The Freedom Side, a weekly show by Breakthrough News. And he's also the author of Shackled and Chained, Mass Incarceration in Capitalist America. And at 7 p.m. for the rest of the conversation, Shaka Shakur will actually be calling in from prison. He has been held captive since 2002, and as a new African revolutionary, has remained staunchly outspoken for Black liberation. He's the author of the forthcoming book, Manifestations of Thought, When the Dragon Comes, which will be coming from 1804 in the next few weeks, so stay tuned. And a documentary is also going to be released about his life very soon in the next few weeks. So a lot of activity there. And of course, when he calls in, we're going to be in the face of all the, dehumanizing bureaucracy of the prison system. So he gets 20-minute intervals with us. He'll keep calling back for the duration of the conversation. But, we ask that you hang tight with us. And so, in other ways, we'll also have to hang on tight because we have quite an expansive conversation before us. Just that introduction, I know, was very long. But we're going to be traveling across the world. We're going to be looking at very different contexts. We're also looking at very different books. So I want you to help us make those connections, to help generate questions, especially at the end of this program when we'll be taking questions. So I'll ask a few questions to our panelists, and I'll open it up for Q&A. But finally, one last note is that I have a plug for the very place that we're in right now, the People's Forum. If you haven't heard, we have a big fundraiser happening right now. We took a big bet on the working class and bought a building downtown. And, exactly, so we don't have to be in the face of landlords who don't want us to put up a Palestine flag in the front, stuff like that, so that we can have our own space because the working class deserves nice things. Our class, our movements deserve nice things. But we have a very ambitious goal of $2 million, and so we're going to need every single penny, every single dollar you got to sacrifice for the struggle to help keep all of this important programming going forward. But yeah, enough from me. Let's get started. We're just going to start off by asking a pretty simple question. Since there's so much to cover, let's just talk about the actual projects that are here on the table and then also the context that they're emerging out of. Before we get into the conversation, we actually have an audio recording from Shaka, which we'll start off with, and then you guys can listen and we'll kind of ground us, and then I'll turn it over to you, Lamise. Sound good? All right, let's get started.
You ready?
I'm ready.
Go.
I'm sharing greetings to everybody. I'm proud of the people. This is Shaka Shakur, North African political prisoner, speaking on behalf of all political prisoners in solidarity, international solidarity, with the panel. I just want to point out a couple of things, a couple of points. I was asked to do this, kind of doing it, just from the top of my head and what have you. One of the things I wanted to point out is the similarities of our struggle, despite borders, the superficial borders and state lines and so forth created by politics and what have you. Like when we say that we stand for human rights, we stand for human rights for all human beings, even those that we may not even agree with ideologically, even those that may be in opposition to our politics. We stand for justice. When we say justice for all, because we recognize that to impose oppression against one is to impose oppression against all, although one should be held accountable and brought to justice for their actions. So when we talk about the African struggle, or so-called Black struggle, we don't want our struggle, especially when we talk about an international panel or international context, to be put in the context of just fighting racism or white supremacy, because those are not our primary issues. Our primary issues, or the primary contradiction for our struggle, is that of colonialism and neo-colonialism and imperialism and the subjugation and domination of a people as a nation of people that struggling for the right for self-determination and independence, for example. It's interesting that you see conversations now by imperialist countries and whatnot, and representatives about a two-state or a state solution of recognizing a Palestinian state as they seek to divide the spoils of war, in strategic locations and land of people that have been subjected to genocide, one of the worst genocides, modern day genocides perpetrated by a state. It's supported by the United States in modern times, and the crimes against international law in the face of the international community and not be held accountable while crime victim. You know, it just angers me every time I think about it. But again, going back to our struggles in political prisons behind the walls, our struggle beyond trying to free ourselves is also to agitate, educate, and organize our fellow prisoners as well as ourselves and create revolutionary mindsets and transform colonial criminal mentalities to feel cadre and to feel soldiers to go back into the struggles and go back into our communities that's joining the struggle to fight for our rights, to fight for the rights of all, and fight for humanity as a whole. And we want to put that in that proper context. We recognize this intersectionality and interlapping of our struggle with Palestinians, with the Indians, and other natives and other organizations in other countries. Our struggle with Haitians, as they fight imperialist dominations, and the byproduct of colonial and imperialist domination that we see playing out on the ground in Haiti, for example. Or we see playing out on the ground in the Congo and whatnot. The byproduct and the aftershocks of imperialist and colonial domination that still manifests itself today, while on the surface it may appear one way, but when you dig in underneath the surface and go back to the original contradiction, it leads back to imperialist and colonial domination and imperialist powers that still capitalize off of and exploit the strategic and mineral resources of those lands. So let's not be divided by the smoke and mirrors and the superficialities that the states create to distract. As we see ICE kicking in doors and state agencies are representing the globalist state kicking in doors and snatching children out of the arms of parents and what have you, as they deport and send us across seas into foreign lands and foreign jails and foreign prisons under the guise of being illegals and illegal aliens and immigrants and so forth. Imagine that on stolen land. How dare you? I rest my case. Peace.
I'll turn it over to you, Lumi, so you can tell us a bit about Trinity, but also about the context of Palestinian political struggle in general.
Thanks, Kate. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and really honored to follow that. I'll share a little bit about the Trinity of Fundamentals. It's a novel by Wissam Rafidi, and first I want to start off by saying that this novel wouldn't exist neither in Arabic nor in English without collective struggle and collective action. And the novel itself was written by Wissam when he was in prison. It was written in 1993, but it's a fictionalized account of his own experience in hiding. He was imprisoned after 1991, but that was after 9 years of hiding. He had gone into hiding when the occupation forces put out a warrant for his arrest, and this marked a very distinct change in the policies of the organizers and factions in Palestine at the time. They had started to take up a new tactic of sending their organizers into hiding. Because the occupation was going after people, was going after leaders in the movement, was going after organizers one after the other. And in many cases, people would be imprisoned for 2, 3, 5 more years and then come out, but then they'd come out to conditions where they weren't able to continue organizing, they weren't able to continue in the struggle, they weren't able to, live their day-to-day, open bank accounts, take care of their households and so on. And so it really disrupted the process and the revolutionary struggle. And so many started to take up the policy of going into hiding instead when warrants were out for their arrest. And for Wissam, and he talks about this in the novel, his character is named Canaan in the novel, and he talks about, that his family told him, "What are you doing? Like, you're being crazy. Like, just go turn yourself in. It'll be 2 years and you'll come out." And he said, no, like this is something I have to do. And he understood it at the time as not just something to evade the occupation forces, but something that was giving to the struggle, that was accumulating tactics and accumulating strategies to evade the occupation. And so in the novel is about his time in hiding. So he's not actually talking about being in prison. The novel is about his time in hiding. And when they finally capture him after 9 years, he didn't think he'd be hiding for 9 years. All at the same time felt very long, and yet when they were at his door, when the occupation forces were arresting him, he talks about that. I never felt this moment would come, that this would actually end. And he wasn't the only one. There were many that went into hiding. Ahmed Katamish, who wrote the preface for the book, was in hiding for 18 years. And he talks about the abnormalities of being in hiding, of having to get used to eating by yourself, of going days without talking to anybody, of reading the same books over and over and over again, and of getting used to that new normal. But all of this, he shares with us over and over again that all of this is not as abnormal as the occupation. What's not normal is the occupation of Palestine and the conditions that they live in. And so all of these things he learns to live with, and he learns to live with while giving us a sense of revolutionary optimism, but it's not romanticized. It's not, all of the glitz and glamour and this, kind of rhetoric about a revolutionary struggle. He talks about the sacrifices of, losing the people he loved. He lost his fiance. He went years without seeing his mom. His family, many of his family members thought he had passed away, and so on. And so, he really gives us a sense of that. And that's to say a bit about the content. But again, this book, I think, it's not just because of the content itself that makes it revolutionary, but the process that brought it to us here today, 30 years later. Reading it in New York City and across the world, which is that, first of all, when he was writing it in prison, it was because of his comrades in prison that he was able to. They would look out for Zionist surveillance and the soldiers coming around. They would tell him when to hide. They would each collect and hold on to some of the papers, because it's not easy to write a book in prison in Israeli jails. There isn't like a room you sit in and write until you're done, but having to use the light whenever possible, having to collect a pen or a tool to write with, and then eventually starting to compile the novel. And actually, in order to keep it safe, they also had to move it from cell to cell, and at one point it was lost. They didn't know where parts of the novel had been. And Wissam actually felt that he couldn't sit down and rewrite this again, because he's sitting in a cell writing about his time alone in this small safe house for years on end, and you can feel it when you're reading the book, that it feels like someone who's writing this is going through something, or is feeling caged or enclosed by things, and yet able to kind of chart their own path. And so, when it was lost, he said, no, I'm not going to rewrite it. And come to find out that later on, he's, in the prison, because the prisons were also sites of struggle, sites of education, where Palestinian prisoners are trying to reclaim, and a lot of them were organizers and leaders themselves that were in prison, and they're trying to reclaim their ability to continue the struggle. And at one point, he sees the prison curriculum come around, which was like, a collection of things that the prisoners read together, and he sees his book on it. And he learns that at one point, when it was being transferred, before it was lost, one of the other prisoners was so moved by it that they actually took to rewriting it, rewriting it, and then transferring it through capsules, which are basically like writing so small in little pieces of paper, wrapped up in pieces of plastic, and then swallowed, and then obviously retrieved later. But this is how moving it was to them. And actually, so the PYM took up translating the book, years and years later. And when you read it in Arabic, there's there's mistakes, and there's not just mistakes, but rather sometimes where you can't tell who's supposed to be speaking here, who's the narrator. And so this process took a group of us that also, amongst us, we had people that were really strong in Arabic writing, really strong in English writing, really strong in historical, historical facts of the struggle, as well as other historical struggles, because Wissam throughout this time, he's reading other books, he's reading he's reading about other struggles and mentioning them. And so oftentimes we're learning about new books through him and through the books that he read. And so I'll stop there, but really, that process of it being written in the first place, of it being carried and then liberated from prison, and then for, decades later, for a group of Arab youth to come across it as well and think, this is a strong story, we want to be able to translate it, putting the work into it, and then also having a collective of us. There was like 14 of us plus a professional translator that was actually working on this translation. So it was very, it speaks of collective struggle. It was written through collective struggle and brought here through collective struggle. So.
I just want to also acknowledge that Shaka has just joined us by phone. So can you clap again just so he can hear who's in the room? Can you hear us okay, Derek and Shaka?
I can.
Okay. Yeah, we can hear you. Okay, excellent. I'll come back to you in a moment. We're just going to finish the cycle of questions, and I think your next answer will be the perfect transition. But Suchitra, I want to take it away for just describing a bit about your project and the context to what's going on in India.
Right. I just want to start by saying that this moment feels so surreal for me. It feels surreal because I'm here discussing, having this conversation, and here you have Shaka on phone, like coming in, and as you said, the bureaucracy of the prison is so dehumanizing. And when we started writing this book on India's political prisoners, when the first edition came out, many of the political prisoners were still incarcerated. Many continue to be incarcerated. But by the time the second edition of the book came out, some of them had been released. And one thing that I found, and then in the second edition of the book, we have these photographs of all of them leaving prison. Every single one of them had a smile in their face. Every single one of them came out shouting in support of resistance, talking for a free world, and always advocating for someone else, right? So for me, I just want to start by saying that being here, having this conversation, is remarkable. I also got to read Shaka's book because Eugene sent me a copy of the book, and reading that made me feel, and again, I read all these three books together because he had sent me the book, I read this book, and then I just gotten Trinity of Fundamentals, I read that. And then I was rereading this book for another talk, and I realized so much of these conversations only make sense when we are having this. And with that, on that note, How Long Can the Moon Be Caged came out of the work of documenting the work of political prisoners in India. It came out of the work of Polis Project, an organization that I founded, in which in early 2020s, what we really saw was that India's authoritarian regime, now ruled by the right-wing BJP, started using a very specific way of incarcerating dissenting voices. Not that this didn't happen before under other regimes, only that in this moment, things were becoming a lot more complicated. They started using India's UAPA law, which is like an authoritarian draconian law, which can be used to detain people indefinitely. And what you really saw was that they were beginning to pick up lawyers, thinkers, writers, student activists, and all of them being detained in the name of being terrorists, often by manufactured evidence, manufactured charges. And one of the things that we started doing was this series called Profiles of Dissent, where we would start documenting each of these political prisoners, but not as individual acts of heroism or resistance, because it's so easy for us to put these figures in a pedestal, make them heroes, and then forget where they come from. So Profiles of Dissent was essentially an historiography of a political prisoner, but within the milieu of where they came from. Who were they? Where did they come from? What influenced their ideas? And it would give you information about where they were picked up, how they were picked up, what laws were used, how many days they were spent. So in some ways, it was both an ethnographic, it was an ethnographic account, but it was also an account that gave you information. And all of these profiles of dissent would often end with prison writings. Every political prisoner in prison, everybody who was being incarcerated that we were profiling was in some ways an artist, was a poet, was a writer. Even if they weren't poets, or even if they wouldn't identify themselves as poets or writers, in the prison, they were beginning to write about their experiences. Some of them wrote poetry about how the prison guards would not give them the mosquito nets, or they would have a mosquito net and the mosquito net gets taken away, and you write a poem as a love poem to a mosquito net because, in that way, the mosquito net becomes the most important thing in your life because it gives you that one night's sleep. And that's how profiles of dissent came together. And then at some point in time, we had enough of these profiles and we were like, we should gather a collection of prison writings. And as we started putting together these prison writings, we came to realize that this cannot just be about prison writings. And the book took the form of kind of responding to that very moment in which this book was being written. So what we did was that the book in some ways starts as a pyramid. Is like we start by documenting, it starts at the timeline. Every single day since Modi has come to power, something has happened. So if you look at the book, it starts at the timeline. Every single day when you look at the timeline, you say something happening. It's like an attrition. Something happens every single day. For instance, if today we are going to document what Trump does and we do a timeline of every single thing that Trump does, you can see that every single day there is an act, there's a violation, there is a violence, something that happens that tells you that this is an ongoing attrition. The next thing that we did was interview and document what was happening. We spoke about the historical, the legal architecture of impunity that was put in place. And then what happened was this chapter called Small Things, which were about the material artifacts of incarceration. What does it mean for us to think about that? We had prisoners sharing things like a straw that one of Stan Swamy, one of India's oldest political prisoners who was killed by the state. He was someone who was suffering from Parkinson's, who was picked up, incarcerated, and he died incarcerated. And the Indian state refused to give him a straw. And this was a man suffering from Parkinson's, and imagine denying him the straw. And in those ways, we built together a book that was in some ways a reflection of the moment. And finally, the book has something called Name the Names, which we felt was important. Just as we have the names of everyone in Gaza who has been killed, annihilated, entire families, lists are important. You see this in Rwanda, you see this in Bosnia, you see this in Srebrenica, you would see this in any community that has been taken away and annihilated. Lists are important. So Name the Names, the list that exists in the book, lists the names of every single political prisoner that we could find. Because a lot of these people, some of them are well known, some of them get the news coverage, but media doesn't get to everyone. So what we have are their names, the number of days in prison, the laws under which they are being held, and many of them are being held without actually a trial, right? I think that's another thing that is in common across so many of these institutions. And finally, the book ends with prison writings, actual writings of the political prisoners. So in some ways, this book is a fragment. It is a puzzle that we put together. But we also realized that the similarities between Black political prisoners in the US, the similarities between Palestinian political prisoners and political prisoners across all states, whether they're democracies, whether they're authoritarian democracies. The idea that modern states manufacture political prisoners became a way for us to look at this moment. And that's what this book did, and that's what the book does. And for us, this is a fragment. This doesn't tell the entire story, but it's the beginning point to the conversations that we can have. And hopefully there will be more books, and there will be more of us writing about these things. And I think I'll just leave it at that. Yeah.
Yeah, Eugene, want to transition us into talking about manifestations of thought, and Shaka can talk about it too?
Absolutely. I mean, I'll maybe say more just about why it was meaningful to us at 1804 Books and me to really want to try to work hard to bring this out. I mean, Derek Ford, my comrade, when he brought me the text, I mean, I've been struggling with Derek for many years, so I knew it was going to be important. But then when I was able to crack it open to see how important it was, it's hard to say. Like, I felt very strongly we had to do this, and Kate, you'll remember, because I was like, we need to do this. Is it possible? We have so many things on the list. But to me, it's critically important in some ways because obviously, when you think about the history of the Black liberation movement in America, the prison text is such a foundational reality. I mean, obviously, you mentioned Asada and her autobiography, George Jackson, Soledad Brother, Blood in My Eye, Angelo Herndon, Let Me Live. I could go on and on about this is such an important element of just the overall Black literary canon and also sort of just the revolutionary practice of Black people in this country of how we have developed our ideas and put our struggle forward. But in this moment, it felt particularly important to me because it felt like an excavation of the justice that we feel in continuing to struggle. Because in the post-Obama era, I feel like there has been this, in a way, nothing is more American than the oppression of Black people, but in another sense, this like Americanization, like we have made it, like we are in a different zone, that Black people are, like the Irish or the Italians, and we're amalgamated into the country. And the idea that we're still struggling for self-determination, liberation, and freedom is something that has been, like all those other books I just mentioned, no one was really questioning that when those books came out, and it became a representation of it. And so, I felt Manifestations was an important intervention just in its pure existence to continue, not that we need justification in the most general sense, but to continue to say to the world, we're still struggling, we're still enslaved in many ways, we are still facing national oppression, and we're continuing to fight, and we're continuing to push forward and be free. But I also feel the content itself, and I won't say too much about it because it's Shaka's book and he's here, but I think there's so many meaningful interventions in the book, and that's partially why I'm excited about it. In the first section, The Personal is Political, I think there's a great essay about, I don't really know exactly how to frame it. Like in the outside world, in the sort of broad mass media world, you'd frame it about masculinity, but I think it's a little deeper than that. At a time where I think there's so much superficial conversation about men and the relation of men to society and patriarchy and all these other things, a very important reflection that I think that a lot of people need to mediate on and think more about in terms of how we rebuild our communities and continue to build forward the struggle. And also in the context of the ADOS FBA world, to have a book that is very clearly articulating the new African perspective and who we are as a people in the United States, and that we are a people, we are a nation, and we do have a history, and we do have a self-definition, I think is actually critically important when there's now this deep reactionary attempt to sort of make Blackness, it's part of this Americanization. It's different than Obama, who's a liberal, but it's sort of a right-wing version of it. And I think to have something that's so clear, so concise, and really putting forward this idea of the new African nation and who we really are, and what that means for our struggle is critical, in addition to everything about revolutionary strategy and all these other pieces. So I feel this is, for our moment now, where it's still so crucial that we continue to lift up the struggle of Black people for national liberation in this country and define it as such. This book will really help be a guidepost in pushing that forward. And I'll just say finally, I also just think the role of ideas in connecting people across borders. And in fact, I was thinking about your other book, Midnight's Borders, when we were listening to Shaka earlier and thinking about internationalism and the ability of books and texts and literature and ideas to bridge so many gaps, which is why when we prepared the book, I said, I have to send this to Sutritra because she has to read it. She's a great author, so I know, she will definitely vibe with this. But, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. And, knowing that the Polis Project, there's some overlap Venn diagram, but you're also reaching people we would never reach and we would never know, and that this can really be an opportunity. And the same thing with Trinities. It can really be an opportunity for us to build important and really critical bridges.
Thanks so much, Eugene. Thanks so much, everyone. Shaka, I'm actually going to pass it on to you to talk a bit about the actual project. How did it come about? Why now? What conditions did it emerge out of? But yeah, we listened to your audio message, so thank you for sending that along. It was very grounding for us in terms of talking about international solidarity and how this talk is even relevant to us today. But we would love to hear more about the book that's coming out very soon.
Okay, well, thank you for this opportunity. All power to the people and revolutionary greetings. And the book pretty much came out of a culmination of years and years of just writing. Some works published, some works old, some new, some continuing theoretical and ideological development. As I continue to politically mature, in the ever-changing world, comrades had been on me to, put a book together and have me. So meeting Derek and other rad, we, finally just decided to take a collection of selected essays and pieces and put it out there. And I think it was timely. It was timely in terms of trying to get people to understand the historical development of the New African Nation and the New African Independence Movement as the spotlight shined on the genocide and struggles that was taking place in occupied Palestine, for one, and other struggles around the world, particularly in the anti-colonial struggles.
You have 1 minute remaining.
And also in terms of the ongoing struggles behind the walls in terms of the prison movement and trying to link the prison movement and the prison abolition movement to the larger revolutionary struggles on both the national and international level. There's just some conversations that need to be had in different communities and movements around political prisons, the POWs, revolutionary nationalism, socialism, prison abolition. What does it really mean? What does it really look like? What does it look like in communities of color? What does it look like in occupied communities? When you're talking about LGBTQ rights and so forth, like how does that play out in different communities and so forth, along with colonialism and anti-imperialism, genocide, military occupation.
Thank you for using GTL.
Right.
It'll be able to call back in a second.
Thanks, Derek. I don't think I need to say anything about that. It just happened. Do you think we should move on to a different question for now, Derek, or should we wait? It'll be pretty quick.
Yeah, it should be like a minute.
Okay, cool.
Eugene could probably say something.
Oh yeah, Eugene, wanna? Oh, sorry.
Thanks, Derek. Yeah, no, I mean, I can say something. Happy to say something. I mean, I think it's important, and I think it just speaks to the nature of the beast that we're also dealing with right now. I mean, there's 2 million people who are incarcerated in the United States, 7 million if you include people who are on probation and parole, which you have to include because that also is a form of prison. Like, I think a lot of times people feel like, oh yeah, like you're out, but the reality is the rules, the stipulations, the monitoring, the violations that go on, even the tiniest little thing that people can happen. And people don't even really know the depth of it. I mean, the things they can say, you can't use a computer, you can't do this, can't be around this person, you can't be around that person. I mean, you can't be around gangs in a lot of states, right? But say you live in an area or in a building, when you come out, and a lot of people around are affiliated, so you can't talk to anybody, you can't interact with anyone, so it degrades your humanity, or at least that's what their attempt is. And so I think this is, a good reminder of the fact that we're going to go right back to Shaka.
I can pass it back to you, Shaka.
Okay, all right. Y'all ready?
Yeah, we're ready for you.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I just wanted to say that in terms of also like women, violence against women in general as well. So for me, writing has always been both therapeutic and a survival tactic. I've been banging with the state all my life since I was 15 years old, in and out of institutions, prison for the most part, juvenile, adult, solitary confinement, supermaxes, control units, maxi units, and all the other shit that they come up with the different euphemisms, but the impression remained the same, So learning how to write and articulate my thoughts have always been a weapon to fight back with a tool to organize with, to educate with, and a form of release for me. And I've continued that pattern, that tradition on, for 40 years. So that led to this project, currently that we're discussing.
Thank you, Shaka. I think that actually transitions us well into this kind of next question, which I think everyone has also started alluding to. It's these very everyday attacks, these very constant attacks, both inside the prison and outside. And we can see that it's a system, it's a system created by our governments, created by occupational forces to dehumanize revolutionary activists, to dehumanize prisoners every day. And so I'm wondering, maybe we'll start with Shaka just so that we can make sure we hear everything you want to say, about how you see governments targeting and systematizing, making a system out of targeting political subjects. How does the law itself become an instrument of warfare against resisting communities? How does, maybe the literal administrative burden or anything else that you might face in your conditions or everyone else can speak to in their various contexts? And of course, what threat do the targets that they're actually targeting pose?
I think that when you look at the origin and development of this country, that the law has always, the so-called law, which has been utilized through force and violence, legitimized through force and violence, have always been used as a weapon of oppression against the have-nots. Against the working class, the oppressed class, and what have you, in the interest of the ruling elite. I like to say that, particularly when it comes to so-called black and white, we might be sitting on the fire, and y'all might be standing against the stove. We both get heat, you know what I'm saying, at different degrees of oppression, And if you look at how the law has always been used, it's always represented a class politic, a colonial politic, and the colonial violence, and that has evolved through various stages. And now you see take for example, the state's response to protesters and the young people protest city. And what do? They come with you know what I'm saying? You federal charge, you try to intimidate. You're making the sanctions in prison more severe. Look at people that support so-called civil revolutionary, whatever. They purchase, but how you support Palestine and whatnot, you need to support terrorism and support better. You know what I'm saying? Because you feel intimidate. Keep people from these type of struggles. But it's no different about it. The prison system right now, fairly out here in Virginia, they're pushing self-police program on us to police one another. Don't go along with the program. You get sent to the mountains. You get sent to more pressure areas. That's chance to making parole and so forth and so on. And that's the way.
Shaka, I think it's breaking up a bit. I don't know, maybe it's a three-way signal thing. I think, or it's just a system, I think. But yeah, maybe slow it down a bit. Maybe we'll catch it.
Okay. So I was saying that the same, you see, even with Trump's administration, and I hate to identify him by name because he's just a figurehead. It's an ideology that goes with Trump. It's an ideology with what's behind Trumpism. The MFs, the dangerous ones, there's the Stephen Millers and the Steve and the Charlie Kirks that's pushing to winning the hearts and minds. It's not really politically educated. Don't know what drinking the Kool-Aid, carrying out the actions of the policies of the state. This is why you can see federalized troops and ICE people, so-called common people, communities, in other communities, oppressed human beings, snatching kids from their parents, snatching mothers from their children. You know what I'm saying? Under us all, that's illegitimate from the first. You know, so in the same in the system, you know, so you have to. I think when we're attacking the system, you have to deal with address the origin and strip away the legitimacy of the origin, and then show its illegal and inhumane application.
Thank you for that, Shaka. I think, we're seeing it play out. Of course, we're in the US right now. We're seeing so many of the things you're talking about play out. And it's raising a lot of fear. But also maybe Lamis, you can speak to as well, and Suchitra, about the various ways in which that we're seeing kind of, it's a connection. We're seeing the ruling classes continue to systematize and make it even more efficient, the ways in which they attack us, even though we as working people see how inhumane it is, see how dehumanizing it is.
I didn't hear all of that, but let me just say, it's a silver lining in that, though. Because if you look at the response and resistance in Chicago, I think I seen something like it was 2,500 or something volunteers who were going out to the schools and so forth and creating safe passageways and whatnot for the children to make it home and not be scooped up or snatched up and kidnapped by ICE or what have you. You know, so when we see these people coming out and attacking Haitians, Mexicans, El Salvadorian, you up here in Koreatown, Chinatown, etc. You attacking all these different so-called demographics, right? It shows people that we're not immune, that you're not safe in your own little communities or zones or whatever, right? Can't be isolated. And sometimes that common oppression forces people to join together, right? Sometimes that common oppression forces conversations to be had that ordinarily would not be had, right? And out of that is a silver lining where relationships can be cultivated, networks can be developed, and greater responses can be put together in order to deal with these type of issues. And one other thing, too, I want to point out is they have a thing, what you see what they're doing with prisoners that's being sent out of the country to foreign countries, where now Trump is talking about so-called American prisoners that meet a certain criteria. If you've been convicted or you're a repeat offender, that you could be sent to a foreign country or a third world country. This, which represents a reflection of what is now foreign policy, which also has an element of human trafficking, because you're paying these third world countries or whatnot to receive us. Right? This is dangerous in the sense that it allows them to target political prisoners, prisoners of war, prisoners that are influential, separate us from our movements, separate us from our power bases, to put us in a situation where you have us assassinated and a host of other things, right? You know, and that's something that needs to be talked about. You're already doing it on a state level. You're already doing it on a federal level. I've been forced out of my state of Indiana to the Commonwealth of Virginia for the past 7 years, told that if I come back, I'm going to be forced to be on lockdown, placed in another supermax or a control unit prison without justification, based on my influence, based on past history, and based on my politics. Mm-hmm. How does this not violate international law and the standard minimum treatment of prisoners as defined by the United Nations, mm-hmm. which the U.S. is a part of that treaty?
Thank you, Shaka. You can't see it, but there's a lot of mm-hms and head shaking happening in the room. So you've got a crowd that's totally with you. I'm going to pass it to Lamise, who's another person on the panel, and maybe you can talk. I'm sure there's a lot of what Shaka is saying that's resonating with you both in terms of your context. But thank you, Shaka.
Yeah, totally. Thank you, Shaka. Yeah, I mean, even if you just look at the ICE arrests over the past few months that are, sweeping the nation, but also some of them are very strategic on the part of the government in terms of trying to scare people away from continuing to organize or continuing to fight the system. And they're, some of them are leaders in their immigrant communities, they're union leaders, leaders in the Palestine movement, leaders of Muslim institutions. There has been this strategy of trying to not just, target somebody or an act, but to scare anyone else in their vicinity, anyone else that's seen as possibly able to mount a popular force against them. And so, we've seen this play out many times, and to what Shaka was speaking to as well, like, when we see the ICE arrests, they usually are, what happens that night, they're transferred to in a facility states away, thousands of miles away from their communities, from their families, and is in an attempt to isolate us from one another and to scare those of us watching from continuing forward. And horrible strategy on their part, because we'll never be scared away from those things. And to speak of some of what Wissam speaks of and what we see in occupied Palestine, the Israeli strategy is similar. The occupation cannot exist if there is any opposition to it. It cannot exist if there are people continuing to struggle and organize against it. And so the systematized, incarceration and targeting that they take up is to defeat the very idea of continuing to organize. It's to defeat the infrastructure that exists to organize, to struggle against the occupation, to struggle against any injustice, and to break the psyche of those watching from taking that up as well, from continuing to take that up. And as I shared, that's why the tactic was taken up to go into hiding. It wasn't just about we need people that can continue to take up this task. No one else knows how to do this task, for example, but it was to break the system that they were imposing. It was to bend the reality of the prisons and bend the reality of the occupation being able to, snatch people away from their homes, their families, and their continued organizing against the occupation. And, we see this in many very clear examples as well. As Kate mentioned in the beginning, Walid Daqqa served his sentence and was dying of terminal illness, of cancer, in prison. First of all, they were trying to kill him through that by continuing to neglect any medical care for him, and he was dying in the prison. And the other prisoners went on hunger strike many times for his sake, just to get him medicine, just to get him seen by a doctor. And when the terminal illness didn't kill him, by the time his sentence was up, they extended his sentence and they killed him. They ensured that he would die in prison, and they killed him. And even now in death, they won't release his body. And this isn't, it's the cruelty of it all, but it's more than that. It's because of what Walid Daqqa represents. It's because of his writings. It's because of his message to the people. It's because of his ability to lead. And even his body, they're holding onto his body that should have been released this year, actually. They're holding onto his body because even the funeral that would gather to mourn him, they're scared. They're scared of Palestinians being able to group up together. And, I'm sure many have seen the videos coming out of Gaza and the systemized targeting of people in Gaza. It's systemized and random and torturous and, snatching up anyone that they can, arresting doctors, arresting journalists, arresting leaders in their communities, and doing so also in a way where people have no idea where their family is. They have no idea whether their family member is under the rubble or is still in Israeli jails. And we see families that are lining up to wait for the buses coming back of the released prisoners. And, some that are surprised and excited to see that their family members are amongst them, and some that, you know, are devastated to see that they're not, and, you know, and still not knowing what the fate might be. But yeah.
Important to connect those dots in terms of compare and contrast. You know, people always talk about what can't happen in America, but we see what is happening in America every day. You know what I'm saying? With the troops, with ICE, so forth and so on, right? Just because they use clinical terminology or terminology that's, you know, doesn't have the same, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, the same kind of impact that you may have with, say, the word terminology of occupation, you know, or genocide. It doesn't necessarily mean that the same thing isn't occurring. And I think that for us over here, we have to get out of this mindset that we have to fight within the rules or the parameters that's established by the state. You cannot say that you're revolutionary or you anti-government and you allow the government to establish the rules of engagement. This is where the concept of dual power come in at. We have to create our own infrastructures and a system of survival and taking care of one another and building intercommunal relationships in terms of community across superficial lines and prejudices that's been established by the state in the interest of the state. You see what I'm saying? While building international solidarity relationships with the very movements that you're talking about. Because what you just described in terms of the assassination of prisoners, disappearing of prisoners, murder through medical neglect, so forth and so on. I've been witnessing that for 40 years.
Thank you, Shaka.
I think it's also important for us, I think we all keep going back to the same idea of making the connections. For us to talk about this present moment, we have to think, the reason why we call this event carceral republics is because carcerality reproduces itself. When we talk about Abu Ghraib and what Abu Ghraib or Guantanamo did, was that Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo essentially invented the category of the forever prisoner. So the United States government basically says that some people can be forever prisoners. And that invented category becomes a legalized category to disappear people. And the same systems of disappearances you see in when Israel is trying to disappear Palestinians, and they've been trying to disappear them since 1947, 1948. But again, the story doesn't begin with Guantanamo or Abu Ghraib, it goes back all the way to Attica. So American Carceral Republic is not only reproduced in Israel, those ideas get taken, reproduced in other parts of the world. And the other thing that I want to kind of think about is the way in which the idea of administrative detention is used in Israel, it's used in India, and also in the United States in the name of what ICE is now doing is for all purposes picking up people, and these are bodies that can be disappeared. So the ideas that we need to think about is the creation of a category of people who will forever be prisoners. No matter what you do to them, they will be beyond the idea of due process, and they will always be targeted by some kind of carcerality. And that's why this idea of escape is so important, because it is not just the prison walls, right? Today, when you have an ICE raid, ICE now is targeting and criminalizing entire communities. I know so many people who haven't left their homes, right? Because that is also, the carcerality doesn't begin and end with the prison walls. And again, in India, what you're seeing is just, for example, in the beginning I talked about UAPA, which is an authoritarian, draconian law. But also understand that a lot of the laws that India adopted were taken from the American Patriot Act. So much of what was done in the name of Patriot Act, us versus them, was taken, reproduced, and kind of replicated in India as well. So I think it's so important for us to also understand the strategies of carcerality. And now, for us, when we think about, at Polis Project, when we think about political prisoners, we are not just thinking about incarcerations within the prison, it is about the capacity to disappear, dispossess entire people without due process. And this is going to, and this has to be connected to the idea at the same time, now that we have a very particular kind of AI, is also going to rob us of our language to articulate this. Right. So carcerality will not just begin and end with prison walls, it will also begin with language. The fact that language itself is being rewritten. All of us here spoke about the power of language, to be able to write from prison walls. Now, what happens if this language, our capacity to articulate ourselves, is taken away? And that is essentially what we are doing. When we use systems that reproduce and cannibalize writing, what we are doing is depriving an entire generation of a capacity to write, to articulate, to speak. So for us, when we think about the work that we do, it really is not just about articulating what's happening in our local communities, because history and memory is so local, but it's also for us to see those patterns. And the patterns that I'm seeing is the absolute capacity to disappear people, disappear minds, disappear bodies, our ideas, our histories, but also in some ways the fact that the future can now be, in some ways the future is now fixed, right? Because so much of it is like, it's as if annihilation is the only way forward, and history itself is being rewritten, which is a weird moment to be in, because the histories of struggles that we know is being rewritten through disinformation, through AI systems like ChatGPT, through multiple things like Grok and Twitter. So the past is being rewritten while the future is being set, which also kind of removes us our capacity to think. So that's mostly where I'm thinking when we're thinking about having these conversations.
I was going to ask Shaka, how many clicks do you have left with us? Just wondering how much time we have.
This will be my last click.
Okay, then maybe I'll skip us forward a little bit towards the last question. Hopefully we'll have time for other questions, but if not, we'll give Shaka a chant before he leaves, all right? So Shaka and everyone else on the panel, could you speak to kind of, all of these books are talking, we've already been talking about it, all of them are coming from this legacy of struggle. These topics aren't new, we're talking about things that have happened hundreds ago that have created a system or created the basis, created fertile ground for this to be possible, for there to be such capacity for incarcerating, for attacking, for censoring. And so in many ways, that history has been taken from us as well, in terms of the history of solidarity between these movements, the history of solidarity between, across borders, between inside prisons, outside prisons. Could you speak to the history of solidarity that we might not know, or the people in the audience today might not know, in terms of the resistance that's happening inside the prison, resistance that's happening outside of the prison, across the walls, and of course, hopefully we're all organizers here, or soon going to be. What's next for us?
Well, as I said, I'm originally from Indiana, which is the prison system that I was in. After 16 years in the prison system out there, I was moved to Virginia, an area that I'm unfamiliar with, didn't have any family family out here. Didn't know anybody out here for the most part. Had a couple of comrades out here that I knew through reading their articles and publications and vice versa. But since I've been out here, I've been organizing, creating structures, networking, and have cultivated a network of comrades and activists and revolutionaries and whatnot. And we're building inside and outside of the prison. which is one of the reasons they kicked me out of Indiana. But let me speak to Indiana. I first came to prison as a 68-year-old kid in 1982. Raised in Gary, Indiana, urban area, not really used to been exposed to racism or whatnot, and came into a system where white supremacy was in your face by the COs, the guards, etc. And you had to fight. You know what I'm saying? You had to fight the system. You as a youngster, you had to being a victim, the predators, etc. With that being said, it was a different culture for the elder prisoners, particularly political, as Zolo, Gregory Resident, I used to both of them murdered the state, etc. You know, they had structure. They was politicizing younger brothers that was coming in. It was schools up there. It was educated. And we took that up. We took that and we in turn evolved to become leaders ourselves, contract ourselves, and organize ourselves to write and get things published and engage in different types of activity and to push back against the system, etc. Some of us have taken their struggle, us got out and came back, so forth. The movement behind the ball always high tide, has a high tide and a low tide. And one of the things right now, reality that we're dealing with the system, is that state is the degree of chemical warfare. You know what I'm saying? The degree of repression and oppression that makes moves on board to cope and escape as opposed to organize and struggle and fight back, because a lot of the young people coming in now doesn't know the history and the sacrifice of various movements within these prisons. That's not universal. You know, it's different depending on different areas and different regions. And that's one of the things that we're dealing with. And the state has learned from the struggles of the 60s and the 70s and even the 80s. And they've changed tactics. You know, they no longer build prisons like the old days with the tiers. They build pods now. You know, they build pods, and these pods is like mini fish bowls. And who they put in these pods is the sociology and psychology, etc. And you like pieces on a chessboard. You know what I'm saying? And they behaviorally profiled and so forth. And you can put these pieces in these pods, generate certain results, predict certain results, and orchestrate, manipulate certain results, so forth and so on. So it's a whole different ballgame. You know what I'm saying? Even the design of the prison itself, and the cell itself, and the furniture that goes into the color scheme of the cell itself, is all geared towards control and behavioral modification and oppression. You know, it's a scientific approach. So it's just a little different. The street culture and the gang culture that state promotes will allow, you know what I'm saying, as a counterweight to any type of political resistance, political organizing. You know, I hadn't engaged in had a so-called violent incident for almost 12 years up until 2018, and I disciplined a CO for spitting in my foot and fuck Black Lives Matter after a year of complaining no action. And I was kept in shoot and supermarket and moved from prison to prison, kicked out of it, and then kicked out of the state. You know, I've been out here and been for almost 7 years. Last 2 years, I've been 15 to 20 educational programs, street programs, college courses that I've picked out of pocket for, etc. And yet I'm being told by Indiana I cannot come back. If I come back, they're going to place an administrative segregation. You know, so these is why. So what do you fear? I'm all 60 years old. You know, you fear the ability to educate, organize, you know, and to speak truth to power. Mm-hmm. You know, and that is why those of my character, those who like us, are kept separate from those that we may influence. But at the same time, while I've been out here, I've been targeted. I've been labeled as a rat for pushing paperwork. I've been labeled as a snitch because I push paperwork, push lawsuits. I done had a target placed on my back. You know what I'm saying? I done had COs to target and organize and try to have me stabbed, killed. You know what I'm saying? Because of my politics, because of the fact that I'm exposing oppressive conditions and what have you. And that is a daily reality, you know, for a lot of them. And because of that, a lot of guys, you know, they feel it like it's more easy to go to other routes. So when I was coming up in the district, politics was politics in command, we TRT, even economic command. Economic dictates everything. Principles, morals, because dudes are trying to get, they trying to pay lawyers, they trying to pay their family, they trying to survive, trying to eat, those fuckers go on. But just like on the street, there's a movement out there in the community. You're not talking about putting food on the plate, having them deal with their everyday, you know what I'm saying? They're not really trying to hear you. They're trying to survive. And to a certain extent, prison system.
Thank you for that, Shaka. Applause. Just in case. I think it's so true. Your book has such a clear call. In many ways, it reads kind of like as a handbook. It has so many crucial lessons, so many things that are super applicable to us in terms of like very common questions we're wrestling with as organizers who are on the ground, who are having to fight for liberation in real time. How do we understand our organizations? How do we understand masculinity? How do we understand internationalism? And your book offers so much insight into all of that. Maybe while we have Shaka, we can take maybe one question from the crowd and then we can return to the main conversation. Yeah, definitely. Okay, cool. I'll take some time. And I ask the person who makes the question to keep it pretty brief because we only have so much time with them. Okay, I see. Yeah, just can. Actually, Adrian, can you also grab the phone so that he. Actually, no, I can hear it. I'll be fine. Just in case.
Hi, Shaka. It was very painful and real to listen to you. Can you understand, or am I talking too fast?
No, I can understand just fine.
Okay. So I taught yoga in the New York City detention centers with the barbed wire. They were 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18 for truancy. Will you please speak to that? How early they come and get our babies?
Yeah, this, I always say that, the state harvests black and brown bodies and the youth from poor communities, right? And that's all communities, but particularly colonial communities of color. I first came in contact with the system when I was 14 years old. By 15, I didn't get no little breaks. I was sentenced to 30 years sentence for my first offense. Do 15 years. With no prom for me, no first card, all that, you know what I'm saying? While my peers was going to their proms and showing their first card and whatnot, I was fighting racist ass pigs and COs with clubs and trying to bash my brains in and calling me niggas, right? That was their reality. What people don't see is the youth. It's like a raw resource in the ghetto community. In the state, like I said, they the mining company. They mining for their gold, for their diamonds to harvest and put into their system. And come in and make money off of. And if you look at what's going on, even with ICE and the migrants and so forth, and immigration and so-called enforcement and so forth, you see what's happening. Who's making the money? They making money. GO building detention centers and private prisons building detention centers and jails and prisons all over the country. Reopening closed jails and closed prisons that they didn't have bodies for. You know what I'm saying? The new companies or companies making Jackie Chan, so-called Jackie Chan shoes, other products, but you know what I'm saying, that they can still put frequency for these people that got this big business. You know. And that's what it's always about. Social control and economics. You know, while pacifying a certain element of the working class that come in these prisons to work because they don't have no other choice and they need somebody to pay their bills.
Thank you so much, Shaka. I guess I'll just ask for if you have any closing words, and we'll continue the conversation, but just in case, before we lose you.
I just want to say, one, I appreciate this opportunity, and it was really inspirational listening to all of y'all, and that the struggle continues. But I want to say that when you're talking about prisons and you're talking about prisoners, you have to think in terms of support. You have to think outside of the box in terms of support. Any movement that supports political prisoners got to have some teeth. And you got to be prepared to bite, because they have become accustomed to us just growling. We should not have to make some of the sacrifices behind these walls that we're having to make in terms of catching new cases, amongst other things, when we have movements out there that is capable of delivering decisive blows to let the state know that certain crimes against us and against humanity will not be tolerated. Do not allow the state to define the rules of engagement, because we are all liberators. That's the dialectic part. And again, I appreciate the solidarity and the support.
We appreciate you.
Yes, it was an honor to have you here, Shaka. I'm so glad it worked out that you could join us. So maybe you'll all join me in saying a chant that I was thinking of in Shaka's message and greeting. I learned it from my South African comrades, but it's very simple. When I say all power, you say to the people, and when I say to the people, you say power. Easy enough, right?
Yes.
All right. All power
To the people.
To the people.
Power.
All power
To the people.
To the people.
Power.
Eric.
Yeah. Thank y'all. Be safe.
Okay, we'll talk soon. Bye. All right. I know we're running a little close on time, so we might not have time for questions, but I want to turn it over to our other organizers, our panelists who are speaking to other important contexts that we don't get to see much of. Being in the US, having, again, these narratives taken from us, all of these things blocked. So just to reiterate the question to start, so tell us about the legacy of struggle that we are inheriting, you know? What are we working with, you know? What have we got to fight from? And what are our next steps moving forward?
I pulled a poem for this question, if I may. Just to read a little piece of it. It's from a poem titled Enemy of the Sun. You may take the last strip of my land, feed my youth to prison cells. You may plunder my heritage, you may burn my books, my poems, or feed my flesh to the dogs. You may spread a web of terror on the roofs of my village, O enemy of the sun. But I shall not compromise, and to the last pulse in my veins I shall resist. And this poem, there's more to it. I encourage people to read it. But this poem, for many years, was attributed to George Jackson. It was found in his cell, and he was killed in prison. And it was only years later that a professor in the U.S. discovered that actually, it wasn't George Jackson that had written the poem. It was a Palestinian revolutionary by the name of Samih al-Qasim, who has also been imprisoned in occupied Palestine. But the poem was found amongst George Jackson's other writings and collections, and the person who discovered it called it a mistake of revolutionary kinship, because it was you could read this and think that George Jackson wrote it, or Samih al-Qasim wrote it, or people really struggling against the same systems that, again, are just trying to destroy the idea of struggle, are trying to destroy the infrastructure of struggle, trying to destroy the very idea that the systems they've built up to seem impenetrable, to seem, invincible, are actually not. That they're actually very easily, torn down, and it can be done so even from within the prison cell with a pen and a paper. And I mean, I don't know what other examples of this we can see other than us sitting all here together listening to Shaka from behind prison walls talking about all the different struggles. No two of us look the same. I'm looking around in the room. We were all coming together in New York City to discuss all of this. And I mean, to your question of what is next, this is the legacy that we're coming from. This is the legacy that, to be honest, we have no other option than to carry forward. We have a responsibility to carry forward, because if prison is meant to, destroy our ability to think of the future and to plan beyond the prison walls, then and people are doing that from within prison. They're planning for us, and they're planning for the struggle, and they're planning for our collective liberation. Then we have no other option, and we have no reason not to carry the torch forward. And I mean, I think I just want to add as well, that again, for Shaka to be speaking with all of us here and bringing up the conditions of Palestinian prisoners, and the accounts and the testimonies that we're hearing now, that they have tried everything, locking up people for decades, torturing them to death, torturing them so that when they're released, they won't tell of these stories, that they won't continue to struggle. And even that is failing. And that's why they continue to try to imprison people. They have to continue to be more and more brutal. And the accounts that we're hearing from the prisoners coming out of Gaza specifically, and since the start of the genocide all over Palestine, is that of extreme torture, of starvation, of sexual assault, physical abuse. Many prisoners are coming out with broken ribs, and they've been attacked in the areas that you wouldn't see if they have to appear in court. Some are coming out with amputations. Over 77 prisoners have died due to torture in Israeli prisons over the past 2 years. Children are being abused. And there are prisoners saying accounts of they're getting such little food that they would actually save up their food. They would fast for 2 days in a row, save up the food and eat all of what they have on the third day, so that night they could sleep well, because you can't sleep if you're hungry. And so they would save up the food to be able to do so. And the psychological torture as well on those prisoners, telling them things like your whole family's been killed in Gaza, and they have no news of the outside world. They have the only news they get is from more prisoners coming in and being able to share what little knowledge of the outside world they had at the time. And so, I mean, to our responsibility to continue the struggle forward. Again, we have no other option. If this is what people are going through, they're trying everything they can, years of torture, decades of imprisonment, continuing to hold bodies of the prisoners, even in death. There is no other option for us than to carry the struggle forward, and to prove that if you think that torturing people and trying to silence them from within the prisons is going to stop them. No, there are thousands and millions of people outside of the prison walls that are bringing their message forward, that are reading their books decades later, miles away, and committed to a long-term struggle.
I didn't know how to think about this answer. So I'm going to do two things. I'm going to start with the personal and then go to the political. My grandfather was one of independent India's first political prisoners. He was, and when I was young, till I was about 13 or 14, I didn't know this. He was incarcerated. He was one of the young communists in India. And the story was that this was under the British colonial rule. These British police officers had gone into this village of villagers protesting and had massacred these farmers who were fighting. And a bunch of these young communists decided that the symbol of state power, British colonial power, was the British police stations. And they went and burned it down. I don't know if my grandfather was directly involved. On days I think he was. But again, he was one of the people who was part of it. I don't know if he lit the match, but he was definitely one of the people who burnt it down. They burnt it down because they felt, and nobody died, again, the fact that we're making these caveats. They burnt down an infrastructure that represented colonial power. I didn't know about this for a very long time. And I felt, when I found out about this much later, I wondered why this story had never reached me immediately. And the only reason I ever found out that my grandfather was ever incarcerated as a political prisoner was I was about 13 years old. I thought I was so smart, so cocky, and there was a debate in the school, and the prompt was, would India have been better under British colonial rule? And I was supposed to prepare for this, and I was like, and then he looked at me and he said, what are you doing? I said, no, this is the prompt, and then I'm just thinking about answers. And he got really upset with me. He said, you should have never agreed to this debate. Which moron gives this prompt? And why are you debating this? You should have walked away. And I didn't understand. And then finally he said, you have no idea what it means to be born in an independent India. Because he was born a colonial subject. It took me another 20 years to understand the meaning of freedom. Not that the country that I was born into was a democracy, was a perfect one, but for him, the idea that I was independent while he was a colonial body made sense. The political aspect is that Assata Shakur died recently, and she died in freedom. She died in freedom because it mattered. For 40 years, the American empire chased her, hounded her, but she died in freedom. But her freedom was collective. It was collective because there were men and women who broke her out and then ended up spending time in prison. And that is the price that they paid for solidarity. For her to be free, which was a collective freedom, people had to pay the price. And we have to understand that we all have to pay a material price. My biggest fear when it comes to solidarity now is that it stops with an Instagram post. I'm not saying don't post, but there has to be more. If we believe that a Palestinian life matters, if we believe that the life of our Black brothers and sisters in America matters, if we believe that political prisoners in India, in Pakistan, across South Asia, across the world matter, then we should be willing to sacrifice something that is material. And I think that material sacrifice must be part of our education. And just as there was this young man who lit a match and burned down the edifice of colonial infrastructure, we should all be willing to light that match. And that match can be metaphorical, it could be literal, but that is what is required. And I think we have to have that sense of understanding that solidarity has a price to pay. And I just wish that is something that we hold on to. And one day, Palestine will be free, and one day, all of us will be free. And as Mariam Kaba says, we do it till it frees us. And I think that is where I'm thinking.
Wow, there's so much to say. Yeah, I mean, even just ending on the point you were making, I was talking to someone about this the other day about Dr. King and how from the Montgomery bus boycott on, he was constantly in jail, under surveillance, being attacked, all these different things. And in the Dr. Benjamin Mays, who gave his eulogy, who also has a very interesting autobiography called Born to Rebel, he says, no matter what the situation, Dr. King always served his punishment. He never ran away and he never asked for mercy. And it really has stuck with me, even though I read it like 2 months ago, because it's true. Like, if it was 2 years later and a court case came down and he was guilty, they're like, you got to go to prison, he would go to prison. Even though in many of these times he was so big as a person, he could have been like, I'm going to stay in Michigan and New York and like never go back to Alabama or whatever, and no governor is going to extradite me because I'm this great international hero with the Nobel Peace Prize, but he went back to prison. And sometimes he would stay there longer even than he had to, just to make a particular witness. And so anyway, that's a non sequitur, but responding to your point, I think, about material sacrifice, I feel so much of what we know about historical figures is just the sort of heroism and not the price that they were willing to pay and willing to engage in. And I think that, the issue of this, I'm so grateful that we had Shaka. I'm so grateful to be here because I think, to your point, Kate, the issue of the historical memory of the cross sections of these struggles has not only, I don't even want to say it's been lost, it's been marginalized. It definitely still exists, it's just people don't necessarily know about it to the extent that they should. And that's obviously intentional, it's obviously direct. It's going to accelerate next year, by the way, because Trump is doing this, this America 250, which is really a vicious assault on historical memory. And I think we have to, it's not even really about like lionizing the founding fathers per se, it's about denigrating the history of oppressed peoples in this country and the justice of the struggles that they have waged to make any semblance of democracy in the United States possible, right? It's to erase that, to deny that over and above anything else. And I think that this issue of the cross, I'm lucky enough to have grown up in a family that has long history in the Black liberation movement, but like the first political issue I ever really remember hearing about is when I was 10 and my dad started going in on me for repeating a Zionist talking point. And it was like, Palestine is always right. And I don't even know, anytime anything would ever come on about South Korea, he would always be like, South Korea, Sigmund Rhee, what a fascist. And then just like go in about how North Korea was good, not bad. And you can think so many different things, and there's a very long, close connection between the Indian liberation movement and the Black liberation movement. And when you read the early histories of the Bureau of Investigation in the 1920s, the thing they were most concerned about is what they called the alliance between the Negro movement and the Hindu agitation, is what they referred to it. But they were in a conversation with the British colonialists because there was a close relation. Like, for instance, Marcus Garvey and Gandhi were in correspondence, and Young India used to publish Marcus Garvey's writings occasionally on different things. And obviously through the communist movement, there were a lot of international connections that were made between India and Black America, Paul Robeson playing a significant role in many of those different pieces. But the thing they were concerned about, the British in particular and the Americans, was that since you had a lot of West Indian Blacks who were playing a big role in the African American liberation movement here in New York and in other places, and you also had British colonialism in India, that Indians and Black people in the West Indies and America and India would get together and bring down British colonialism and Jim Crow, and that it would happen all at once. And they weren't like joking. They actually thought this was a real fear. Like, if we can't control India, if we can't control the West Indies, and we can't control the US South, like, imperialism could go down. And in the wake of World War I, you had the Bolshevik Revolution, you had all these things. So it's very, just the fear factor of the solidarity of these movements was incredibly high. And, there's a reason why when Paul Robeson was being, massively smeared and destroyed in America, the probably number one country that was promoting him was India, along with China. It created a big international incident, in fact, when there was 1958, a whole 200 events for Paul Robeson's birthday in India, and it was like a huge controversy. America filed an official protest with Nehru's government, all these things. But these long histories that I think we need to remember, and that we have to excavate, and that we have to keep these conversations going. And I'll just close on this, because they are talking. That's why I brought up the thing about British colonialism in the US. They were talking to each other about what are our problems. And now if you think about, sort of the most pro-law and order forces in the United States, Modi and the BJP in India and Israel, these people are all talking and working together all the time. And in the same way we get together and have conversations, there's the official stuff that you hear about and that you work in, maybe you hear, but when they're just sitting around at the hotel after the conference, What are they talking about? They're probably talking about how to share all these different forms of oppression and how they can make things work. And hey, what worked for you over in India, and how can we apply that, here in the United States? And like, what's that going to mean from Israel, and all these different pieces. So they have an active conversation that they are continuing on a daily basis on multiple different levels that has state legitimacy and resources behind it. So we have to have an active conversation and continue our conversations, because it's not just solidarity in the abstract, it's actually how the struggles are being constructed on an increasingly global scale, and thus the resistance has to be constructed on an increasingly global scale. But I really appreciate it, and thank you so much for the panel, and thank you for Sutra for even having the idea for us to do this event.
Well, obviously, there's so much more we could talk about. We could probably sit here all night, ask questions all night. I'm only sorry that we don't have enough time to do that. And I made such a big speech about asking questions in the beginning, too. That's my bad. But I encourage you to come up to us, ask questions after the panel, buy the books, or at least Manifestations of Thought is out for pre-order. You can get it on 1804books.com. But Trinity is at the front, so is How Long Can the Moon Be Caged? But again, like these works, these books, everything we're talking about today, it's the victory not only of the people who are in prison, who are able to write these things down, but it's the victory of movement. It's the victory of organized struggle for us to be able to see the ways in which, all these like small human aspects we take for granted, like what Lamise is talking about, being able to sleep through the night and not be hungry. We want that. We want to be able to walk down the street and not fear for our lives, or fear that our families are going to get snatched up, or our immigrant neighbors aren't going to get taken away unjustly. And we also want more than that, right? We wanna live, we wanna thrive, we wanna be able to love each other without worrying for our basic human needs. And our demands have always been so basic. They've just been for the things that we need to live and survive and live well. And we're not fighting to lose, we're fighting to win, right? Okay, cool. So I'm going to plug a couple of things, and if anyone else wants to plug anything, I want to raise those as well. But this Saturday, there's also going to be an event called the People's Agenda. It's happening, oh my God, where is it happening? At Riverside Church, a historic church that has always stood for liberation struggles. And it's going to be happening, I wrote the time down on a different document. Who's got the time? 9 a.m. It's going to be a conference all day led by IFCO, Pastors for Peace. But it's bringing together faith leaders, labor organizers, civic societies or organizations, parties, all to talk about or coming together with one unified demand, which is people over profit, which we can all understand, right? So I hope to see you all there. Also, every Monday here at the People's Forum, we have Shut It Down for Palestine meetings. We've been having them since October 2023, and they will keep going, and so we hope to see you there. Hundreds of people come across the city to organize in their neighborhoods, to do outreach for Palestine, and they happen every Monday here. And we also have an exciting new coalition called ICE Out of New York. Can we agree, ICE Out of New York? Yes. All right. So November 1st, it's going to be our first volunteer meeting. It's happening at 3 p.m. here. So if you're feeling eager to take up the fight, if you're feeling eager to get involved in all the ways, to make those sacrifices, we're not going to see the world change if we don't change our own worlds every single day, right? And then finally, of course, the donation campaign, peoplesforum.org/future. But is there anything else you guys want to share? All right, well, come up, ask us questions, interrogate us. Thank you so much for spending your Thursday night with us. Hope to see you back here soon.
Thank you, Kay. Thank you so much. You're amazing.
Thank you, 1804.